in conversations that I've had with them or whatever, and I've had, one of them to say, well, how come you, spend time with them, or how come you got that when we want to go, we can't, whatever. And you want to explain, but you also want them to feel that you're never second. But I know you said your children experienced the same thing. How did you handle it?
It was, with the oldest one, it wasn't much of an issue. Most of y'all know Elder Betton. He didn't have much of an issue, but the youngest one, he really went through a lot as a PK kid.
Mm-hmm.
He hated that label on him. Everywhere he went, when he was here in Hinesville, he used to say, "Mom, I can't go nowhere, I can't do nothing," because everybody would say, you Elder Betton's son, and you shouldn't be doing that. And he just felt like what's the word? He didn't have an identity of his own. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't live. So I can't live in this city. Because everywhere I go, and as soon as he got of age, he left. As soon as he got of 18, he went in the military. He just said he couldn't. And to this day, he said, "I ain't coming back to Hinesville to live," because he feel like he has to live up under a microscope. And I think that is so unfair.
Yes.
It is so unfair the way we do PK kids. We label them.
Yeah.
Preachers' kids, and I think that's so.
Kids,
it's so unfair, because as soon as you see, you're like, "Oh, you Pastor Morse' daughter, aren't you?" And already your expectation of what they should or should not be doing is already right there, just like you identifying their last name. And so it was a really, really, really struggle with my youngest son. I think he made decisions based on the way he was feeling. He regret them now, but he made those decisions back then because he just felt like he was isolated, I guess, because there was such pressure on how he should behave and not behave. And that's so unfair what we do with the church, what we allow the church to do to our children. It's so unfair.
They live in a cocoon.
Yes.
Because our kids had a double whammy.
Yes.
Being a pastor's kid,
Yes.
so to speak. When she got into ordained ministry, of course, she's a preacher as well. And then I'm a judge. So they had almost no identity whatsoever. And what we had to deal with more than anything else, and sometimes it really didn't come from the church, it was coming from the other aspect is that they were treated differently because they were our children. And we had to deal with making sure, one, they didn't get mixed up in either way. One, thinking that they were getting preferential treatment, and at the same time, they were not being abused or taken advantage of because of who they were. And there are times that happened with respect to kids because of what I did. I do something in the courtroom, it ripples with respect to some relative or somebody else that has some connection to them, and take it out on them. And so I had to deal with trying to shield them from that aspect, as well as dealing with the ministerial aspect and getting them to understand your children. Be a kid. Do what's necessary for you to thrive and things of that nature. And that has been I know it's been very difficult for both of them over the years, but thankfully they went through it relatively well. But it took constant work from our standpoint, together and individual, because when they were involved in school activities, she was the one primarily going, and I would be coming later if I got there at all. Sometimes I wouldn't get there, and then I had to deal with that particular aspect about, well, why Daddy didn't get to my game? Why didn't Daddy come and see me cheerleading? And that sort of stuff. So it was always a constant reaffirmation, not only of your love for them, but that they are identifiable beyond simply just being being a judge's daughter. And I kidded with them many times, particularly when they got to the point where you think they ought to be dating or whatever it was. And they go, "Well, we can't do anything anyway. Everybody knows you're a judge. No one's going to, talk to us," which was true. But I would kid like, anyone would come to the house, my first question was, "What's your social security number?" And the guy would look at me like, "What?" Those sort of things we had to deal with to a great extent, but it requires a lot of work with respect to couples making sure that their children are affirmed as being individuals and not a label. Our organization of the non-construction has that label. PKs.
Yeah.
And, you know, our kids never liked it either. They can't stand it. Now, they will use it in jest sometimes because they understand where they have come from. And now that they're much more mature in themselves and in their relationship with God, they understand that some of the things that we had to somewhat regiment or deal with has helped them develop spiritually and for the better. So they understood from that standpoint being PK is fine, but the label itself can't stand the word.
I think we have to make sure that we don't just wash aside how they feel. We have to address it, because if not, they're not just presenting the church, but then they begin to present you. And so if we just say, well, you know, they get angry or they have a feeling about why we're not being there or why not participating with them, or looks like we put the church first, we can't just say, you know, you'll be all right, you don't understand. We can't do that, because then they feel, oh, I'm not even important enough to sit down and talk to me about it. And so, you know, when we look back over things, I realize that I realize there's some things that we probably could have handled better. But I thank God that He's given us wisdom, that hopefully and prayerfully that there was no damage or there was no any glitch put in the relationship, because we constantly tell them that we love them, but we don't ever want them to feel slighted because we let even the church come first. They know God is first, but there's a difference. Let me say this.
Yes,
There's a
please.
difference between putting God first and putting the church first.
Yes.
God is always first.
Amen.
But the church cannot come before your family,
Right.
because your family is you. You had, I kid around and say, I was Debbie Morse before I was First Lady Morse. So we have to always realize, and I don't think always, sometimes pastors don't realize that, first ladies, even congregation don't realize that. I love you, we appreciate your work, but you don't come before my family. And I think that's one of some of the things that some people feel, that everything else comes first. We're getting down to, I knew we weren't going to get to half the stuff on here. This needs to be a 2-hour thing. But I want to ask each one of you to say this. I want you to say, what is a key ingredient for balancing, but for making it work? And if you had one piece of advice to share with a pastor or a first lady or people in ministry, what would it be? We're going to go around the table. First question is, what's the key ingredient that was important for you all to make things work? Because I'm going to get yours and I'm going to get hers, and then we'll go ahead.
For me, I think it was sacrifice. The ingredient of realizing that there has to be a sacrifice made on my part to humble myself and admit that as anointed as you may be, you're not always smarter than your spouse. There is a sacrifice that has to be made for me to sit down and listen and hear. So I really had to sacrifice my time, my own view of things to realize that I may stand in a pulpit and preach and be able to do an excellent exegesis of the word, but when it comes to going back home and sitting down and being able to talk to my wife, that's a totally different situation. So sacrificing the ideology that you're all of that and then some, and really making it work with your spouse was a great trait that I had to learn.
Okay.
For me, it's honest communication. You say we always, communication is the key, but it's not always honest communication. Sometimes I had to learn to tell him how I saw things or how I feel, regardless of how it made him feel. I had to bust up the Superman.
Be his kryptonite.
Yeah, exactly. I had to be the kryptonite because I didn't want him to end up like I seen some other pastors end up. And I had to bring him back into reality that, honest communication, baby, look, you ain't all that, in here, in 309. But I think in any relationship, it has to be honest communication, because we women, sometimes we hold back, we'll cry and we'll do all that, but we won't really tell how we really feel unless we're arguing, and I don't want to get to a point where we have to argue. We don't argue either. I'm glad you mentioned that. We don't argue either. But I had to get to the point where I had to just be honest about how I saw things and how I feel as far as ministry and our home life and dealing with the children. as far as the church aspect. And to just realize, I always tell people, even in ministry, I had to teach my sons, it's God, family, and then the church, because you cannot get them mixed up. Once you get them mixed up, you're gonna have a problem. That's how I see it.
I agree with her 100%.
You know.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate and I thank God for is that she has no trouble being completely honest. And it's one of the things that I have appreciated over the scope and the light of our marriage and relationship is that she's always been completely honest. And so I have to take what honestly comes to me and use it in a fashion that's to the benefit of her, me, and the family first. My relationship with God, of course, comes first. But in that relationship, I'm confident and I'm fully of the opinion that in my relationship with God, if I truly love God the way that I'm supposed to love God, then I love her. Because if I love her as Christ loved the church, then I am in completeness because of her, because God gave her to me. So that aspect comes first. So with her being completely honest, I thank God for that particular aspect because it keeps me grounded. It gives me to understand that I am an individual just as she is. We are co-equals. And as a result of that, it's not going to work unless both of us are grounded and well balanced. Because if either one of us is out of kilter, that's a problem. And that is the aspect in which God calls us together anyway. I'm here to balance her weaknesses and to glorify her strengths, and likewise she's to balance my weakness and glorify my strengths. And as a result of that, that makes us one. And that way, nothing gets in between that aspect of it. So I thank God for our honest communication. I'm still working on, as I say, ministering in the way that it gives her the understanding that I hear and I understand and appreciate honest communication. Because believe me, I'm a very good listener. Okay? I'm trained to listen first off. And then it helps me with respect to everything else that I do in ministry by being trained to listen, that I will hear what's being said, but the training allows you to hear what's not being said as well. As when God speaks, sometimes we hear what's not being said. And so I have to get in a mode where I relate and convey and minister to her. I have heard you. I understand it and I appreciate it. And then be honest enough that, okay, well, we may not agree on this. Okay? And sometimes we get to the point where we get, okay, well, we're going to respectfully agree to disagree on this particular point and not allow it to be a block or a barrier with respect to everything else that we have to do. And simply because we have a disagreement about something doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable to the point that it becomes a loggerhead or becomes a block, and that's what the enemy is going to use at that particular point. So where we have disagreements, then we both have to continue to pray so that we can see the other side's perspective from Sunday's point, and how am I going to come closer to the middle or come closer to that particular point of view without it diminishing me in any way, one way or the other. That's what I mean.
Okay. I think everything you said was good. One of the things that come to mind is respect. I respect we have to respect each other's views, even in the fact that we don't agree. Respect the fact that even as pastor, you're not always right. Respect the fact that even as a first lady or whatever it is that we say, even though we feel it passionately, doesn't necessarily mean we're right. But we have respect the fact that we disagree, but then let's talk about it honestly to get it out that we need to do. And it is going to take sacrifice. It's going to take work. And that's our point of this whole discussion. And this hour went by much faster than I would have wanted it to. But there is a lot more meat to this. If you are in ministry, whether you're in ministry or not, this is particularly our focus today. If you are in ministry, if you are pastoring or you're just getting into ministry. And I don't know about you two, we still learning about each other. It's an ongoing process. You don't reach the point where I know everything about you now, or I'm not going to disagree with you, because things are always changing. Things are always, the aspects are changing, and different things coming up. And so it's an ongoing process, and so the work is continual. I encourage congregations, and we didn't get to this question. My question was going to be, how can the church help us to stay balanced? And I'm going to lead that with food for you to think on, because we didn't really have time to get in it, because you can't help. You really can't help. And so I want to encourage congregations if you can do that. We're going to take about 5 minutes here. Does anybody have a question from the audience that you'd like to ask? Anybody? Did you get anything from this?
Yes.
This works whether you're in pastoring, ministry, and first lady, or whether you're husband, wife. It works. It still takes sacrifice, communication, respect. It takes all the things that we're going to do. Come on and put some love, to show some love for our guests today. Bishop Kevin, the First Lady, Lorraine, Betton, thank you so much for coming. You really helped. You set the tone for what it is. This first session has been a blessing to my husband and the priest of my household and my pastor, Reverend Johnny Morse Jr. Thank God for you and for you being with us. And I thank all of you for coming today. I really do appreciate it. And those of you who are tuning in, who are listening, I hope we've said something that's going to be a blessing. I hope it's something that the seed's been planted, and they'll grow from it, and you can bear fruit from it to realize you can do it. It's just going to take some work. Amen? Anything else we need to cover before we? Any other questions?
What was the question that you left with them?
The question was, how can the congregation of the church help us to keep no balance? Is there anything they can do? You got a quick answer? Got a quick answer?
No, I just wanted to hear from one of them.
Oh, interview? Yes, Miss.
I think that you have to pray for each other and get on one accord. And things will work out through God.
Amen.
Okay.
God first.